Okay, we're live. I'm kind of working on the on the like the animations and the music and the stuff in the background. So you're my guinea pig. Hope that's fine.
Yeah, I love it.
Awesome. You see a little bit of like our core branding in it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Awesome. Appreciate it. So let's dive right into it. This is a fireside chat. We love to talk to smart, insightful people about how to improve startups' journey and challenges. And for this specific session, when we're talking about how to growing teams, I'm really, really happy and thankful for having you with us, Chris, to share your insights. You've seen some interesting journeys in the past. So let's kick it off with a quick introduction on your side. Like you've seen a couple of explosive growth companies in the past.
Yep.
So could you give us like a quick update on like your experience and background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had the opportunity over the past 12 years to work at a couple of companies here in Silicon Valley, one being Twitter, as well as Uber, DoorDash, and all three of which are very large brands at the moment. In that capacity at those companies, I was really focused on talent operations and strategy. And then I've sort of evolved into the broader sort of people strategy and operations space within those companies, most notably at DoorDash, my most recent, prior to my current company at OpenStore. OpenStore is a much smaller company. It is a Series B e-commerce startup. It's actually based in Miami. And in my role today, for which I just started 2 months ago, I'm helping to lead our people strategy and operations function.
So that's really good. Thanks for the background. And it must be an interesting perspective, a situation to be in when you're in that stage where like, okay, we got the funding, we need to grow. Where do we find the best people? How do we get them on board? Like your company now is on a Series B level, but if you want to just comment on what you've seen in the past and the learnings that you've gone through with Twitter, with Uber, with DoorDash, like what are the key things that you want to share to earlier stage founders that are really trying to get to that level, but are maybe not thinking through the whole thing?
Yeah, I think to me, at any stage of a company, whether it's seed, Series A, or publicly traded, quality of your talent is the most important aspect. And oftentimes quality is compromised for speed. And that's an area which you have to be very intentional, conscious to avoid.
Okay, what do you mean?
And so what I mean by that is, when you think about hiring quality, it's about finding people, especially pre-series, finding people that can really do two things. I think when I think about quality, I think about two things. You have, I'll use a metaphor which is quite provocative, but I think it might resonate, which is, in terms of quality, you have two types. You have people that are extremely, they're relentlessly resourceful and they know how to get things done. I mean, it's clear there are certain people that just know how to get things done and others who don't. I describe those as ammunition, right?
Yep.
And then you have folks that know how to carry an idea from inception to go live. They know how to pull people along. They know how to charge up the hill. These people are barrels. And so the idea is, how do you hire as much ammunition as you can, relentlessly resourceful people, but at the same time, you can only hire as many ammunition as you have barrels. So meaning I need to hire people that can charge up the hill. I need to hire people that can give me leverage as an entrepreneur, that can carry an idea from inception to go live, right? I need to hire those barrels as much as possible. right? As many of them as possible. If you only have 5, you can only do 5 things at once. If you have 6 barrels, you can do 6 things at once.
Yeah.
And
So
so
is that the sorry to jump in, but is that what you mean with like I often hear Silicon Valley methodology of early stages, like your first 10 employees is beneficial if they are former founders themselves or like have that like width of experience?
it's a good question. I think another concept, and not to throw another one out there, is hire for slope, not y-intercept. And the
Yeah.
idea is, every founder wants to hire A players, right? People that have been proven in the past, right? They've come from this company, they've come from this school potentially, or maybe they've sat in this role before. But the reality is that we don't have the luxury to hire a bunch of proven folks that have done X, Y, or Z in the past. And so, especially when you're trying to hire your first 10 employees, the idea is you want to hire people that have potential, people that have the potential to learn and grow with the company, right? And not only can just do the job that you have today, but can do the job that the company needs in 6 months' time and 12 months' time. The reality is we are all very agile companies, especially early, fast-growing startups. We're all agile, so we need to be able to evolve and grow with the company.
You mentioned the culture many times during the session, and a couple of components which you believe is the sort of foundation for that. I think it's such an important thing to share. Do you want to just mention, like, you don't have to run through all of them, but what are the sort of the key things that you see that creates that great culture that you've seen in the past? I think we talked a little bit about Twitter, for example, on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think oftentimes when we consider culture or how to define our culture, we tend to just gravitate towards values. And it's clear values are very much a part of defining and driving a culture within any one business, agnostic of maturation stage. Values are extremely important. They are guiding principles, right, that define how we want to operate, where we want to be, and how we want to get there. But the other components I think are worth mentioning is vision, for example. A strong corporate culture starts with a clear and compelling vision. And that vision sort of carries you throughout. And so I describe it in the sense of my time at Twitter. When I think about Twitter was, at the time that I was there in 2012, early 2012, like our idea was to be the global town square. The idea was to give everybody a voice and to create a space where we can have dialogue. And it sort of broke the foundations of hierarchy and structure. And in fact, I actually was compelled to join Twitter because of the Arab Spring. And so that idea, that vision that we had for Twitter as a platform for the world, that carried through to how we operated as a company. In fact, that vision, it sort of helped define our strategy and how we actually wanted to build the platform, how we wanted to operate internally, how we wanted to communicate. Again, there was a ton of care, there was a ton of learning, and there was a ton of passion at Twitter, which I describe as one of the strongest cultures at the time in Silicon Valley. And then another piece that I think is worth mentioning is the physical space, and we are all operating in a very different physical space now. A lot of teams are very remote and distributed, but it's still all the same in terms of its importance. Creating a space where people feel like they can collaborate, where they can effectively communicate, is extremely important, where they can understand who people are. And so I urge people to consider, like, what does the workplace look like, whether physical or digital? And how do you create a space of collaboration? How do you create a space that resonates how you want to operate and where you want to grow your company?
Have you read that book, Creative Inc., about the early days of Pixar?
I haven't read the book. I've listened to a couple podcasts that have referenced it.
Yeah.
It does have some very compelling points.
Yeah, it's a it mirrors what you're saying, and basically, like Steve Jobs started redesigning the whole office, and like instead of having people in booths, he's like, no, let's get everyone together. As
Yeah.
like the very early edition of a co-working space, basically,
Yeah.
to exchange ideas, create culture, inspire each other,
The synergy.
streamlined communication.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, our founder at Open Store, Keith Raboy, he's very much sort of shares that ethos. The company is actually based in Miami, and the idea is, while a early stage startup Series B, he wants people to primarily be in Miami and be in the office because he wants to create that environment for sure. And so, and that's one of the things that we're working through is how do we sort of invest in that sort of ethos, but
Yep.
while also continuing to grow and expand in a way that we feel is necessary, and that is creating hubs, whether it's in New York or whether it's in the Bay Area.
Yep. Are you basing those hubs based on where there are talent pool, or is it because it's closer to the business side of things? What's the logic?
Absolutely. So when we think about our hubs or how we want to grow beyond Miami, it very much is based off of the talent market.
Yeah.
I think what we saw over the past few years was a talent market that was grossly distributed, largely unknown. Right, people are moving all over the place, whether it's temporary or permanently. But I think what's been realized over the past 12 months, I will say, is that people have continued to gravitate back towards centers of gravity in the Bay Area, New York, Seattle, Austin, and and it's proving true, and that's been in our recruiting strategy as well. And so we're actually building out those offices because the talent is there, and they're not inclined, to move to Miami.
Yep. That makes sense. But why Miami?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there are a couple of different cities that have popularized over the past few years, and I think some of those Austin is one of them. Miami is another. If I'm honest, I think it's there's probably fiscal advantages in terms of taxes, and so folks, if given the opportunity to be remote or distributed, they want to find the advantages to find loopholes in terms of a fiscal opportunity. And so I think Miami is one of those cases in points. But Keith Raboy himself moved during the pandemic to Miami. It is viable in terms of its sort of tech talent pool, but it's still very much emerging.
Yeah. Well, it's not. It's difficult to find a similar developed ecosystem somewhere else than SF.
For sure.
You need to come to Stockholm or Tel Aviv.
Yes.
Moving on, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about, and if you're tuning in and listening, you can just write in the comments on the down or connected to the stream. If you write your question, then that will pop up, or I pop it up, and then we'll bring it up. So feel free to jump in with questions if something comes up. You mentioned, and I love this quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Just to continue on the culture topic, like, do you want to break that down, what that means, and
absolutely,
the heritage of it?
Absolutely. I've had the opportunity to work with several co-founder CEOs in the past, and I had a pretty great relationship with Tony Xu. And when you think about co-founder CEOs, through the maturation stage of their companies, they will wear many hats. They might be a product manager at one point, they might be a recruiter at another point, they might be the chief operating officer, at another point. But two enduring sort of scopes that they carry throughout the maturation stages is strategy and culture. And sometimes strategy can be can overlook culture.
Yeah.
Right. But the reality is, culture does eat strategy for breakfast, because culture is the foundation for how you want to grow your business, right? Strategy is evolving. Strategy changes year over year. We are constantly introducing new strategies. We're constantly trying to invent the next billion-dollar business. DoorDash, for one of them. Food delivery was our main line of business. Then we expanded beyond that to grocery, to convenience, right? So our strategy is constantly evolving. But the thing that has been constant is the culture that Tony wanted to create from day one, and he wanted to carry throughout its maturation. Now, the culture piece, it will evolve and it will sort of change over time, but at its core, it's the same. At its core, it's the same.
So that makes sense, and I think it helps the team to have some shining star in the future. Which direction are we going, and why, and how, and why? What's our purpose, right?
Yep.
That is so strong in times, especially now when it's such turbulent times. Like, what are the purpose of some businesses, and how are we really trying to change the world into a better place?
Absolutely.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
You hired, like, when a company grows explosively, there are a bunch of stuff that happens, a bunch of challenges, and things tend to at the cost of structure. You just want speed, and you want the right people, and then hoping that you'll figure things out along the way. Hiring the right people, when you started looking at like management layers, like, what have you seen? Because they are culture barriers, right?
Yeah.
What have you seen there as best practices when you're starting to get those managers into your organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in fact, I'll sort of inverse that question of some of the things that I've seen that have gone wrong, right?
Oh, yeah?
And what not to do, because I think this is actually extremely important. And I'll speak in the context of Uber. In 2017, Uber experienced something that was extremely catastrophic. There's a firestorm at the company for a multitude of reasons, but a lot of it wasn't really a consumer brand issue in terms of the quality of the product. It was the quality of the sort of experience at Uber. It was an employee brand issue. It was a people issue. And so what we did was we brought in, an extraordinary strategist and fixer, and her name is Frances Frey. She was a Harvard professor. She works with notable companies to help through transformation. When she stepped into Uber to diagnose the challenges that we had at Uber, what we learned was, like, there was repeatedly mistakes at the management level, time and time again. And this was really illustrated by Susan Fowler, who was an engineer at Uber at the time. And she wrote a now famous blog post which detailed some of the failings of managers and leadership at Uber. So when Frances came in, she went to diagnose. What she realized was, at the time, Uber was about 14,000 full-time employees. We had about 3,000 managers at the time, 3,000 managers. Now, you could easily assume that you had 3,000 bad managers, right, who contributed to the time and mistakes over and over and over. Or you had 3,000 managers that were just ill-equipped. And what she reasoned through a bunch of dialogue and learnings was it was the latter. It was that we weren't equipping our managers. Now, what was very clear is we were growing so fast that we often were putting people that were extraordinary ICs into manager roles. And that was our first time ever managing. And oftentimes they may be managers of managers. Mm. And we weren't giving them the tools that they needed to be successful in those manager roles, right? Yeah. Because we just assume that since they're great individual contributors, that they'd be extraordinary managers. And you can't make that assumption. You have to be intentional about developing your managers and how you select who your managers and who your leaders are in your organization, which their job is to build trust amongst their team and empower them to bring their best selves to work such they can deliver their best product for the company.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about that triangle of trust as well. I'm going to put it up here because I think it's super relevant. I do want to dive into that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So Frances Frey, by the way, she has an amazing TED talk about the trust triangle, and I encourage you all to visit it at some point. But the idea is trust is the most important thing. It's the first thing that a manager should have. And when you think about building trust, it can be simplified through three key ingredients. One is authenticity, which is to say that if you sense that I am being authentic, you are more likely to trust me. Two is logic, which is to say, if you sense that I have real rigor in my logic, you are more likely to trust me. And then three is empathy, which is to say, if you feel that I have empathy towards you, that I am more invested in you than myself, you are more likely to trust me. Authenticity, logic, and empathy. And the idea with that trust triangle is if you are wobbly in any one of those three, you create an environment where trust is degraded. And so the idea is you need to focus and identify on those three sort of components or ingredients and understand where you might wobble as a manager and overinvest. Okay, and overinvest. I will say that, at Uber, empathy was the one where we wobbled the most, right? Management didn't simply operate in the context of I care about you versus I actually care more about myself. And that might not be true from the manager's perspective, but it was the perspective of our employees.
Yeah, that's how it was perceived.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the key word is trust.
Absolutely.
I want to tie it into before we continue, I'm assuming just for those who are tuning in, let me just see if I can just get your reference point. This is the presentation, right?
Yes, that's it.
And she talks, she dives in on that.
Yeah, and that's Frances. And so again, this is 15 minutes. Extraordinarily valuable.
Yep. And this is available on TED's website. So just jump in. Nice. So very special times now. We've gone through a pandemic. There's been supply chain management. There's been interest rate increases, war in Ukraine. A bunch of different things are going on. And now, a couple of days ago, bank crash and bank crisis, which we don't know exactly how it will spread into tech in general. This is like a temporary bump or like what's going to happen. Do you just want to because it resonates a lot with communication and communication skills as leaders and which connects a lot to culture, as you talked about earlier. What is the best practices here in times like this? You might have to lay off a lot of people, or in some cases, half of Silicon Valley is based on Silicon Valley Bank and might be having issues making payroll this month. Hopefully not, but what are the best practices you've seen here? You've seen several crises and company challenges in the past.
Yep, absolutely. A very sort of relevant topic in many different ways. There's so many different facets to the challenges that we are facing in the market today. And, the way that I tend to look at it is when you think about tension, right? Tension sort of manifests within any one company, within any one team, when three things sort of arise. One, expectations are unrealistic. Expectations are unaligned, right? Or expectations are unmet. It's all about expectations and managing those. And so for me, how I tend to sort of navigate these challenges is through radical transparency and over communicating,
Yep.
right? Such that you can manage those expectations. So that when you have issues that are impacting us, whether in a direct manner, and it might be, with Silicon Valley Bank crashing, like how does that impact my payroll? Or it might be a social issue that is passively impacting me as an employee and how I might contribute and bring myself to work on a day-to-day. Here in the US, we saw a lot of those social impacts to our employees. And so the idea is acknowledging it, right? Talking about it, right? And in a way where you're being authentic, right? And you're over communicating, you're being empathetic. You are trying to understand where your employees are sitting and how they're perceiving, right? All of these various distractions, all these various components that might be influencing their day to day. And so the key is like creating a space where you can allow communication to flow, right? And you can manage expectations.
Yep, that's a really good answer. What I think jumps in here, like as a logical pushback, is what if I'm like generally everyone is fundraising and in many cases you're growing aggressively or want to grow aggressively, so you're sort of above the burn rate you should be at, and you're constantly doing runway management, like when do we run out of cash and so on. Sometimes I've seen being too transparent about we're gonna run out of cash in 3 weeks unless XYZ happens, or I've seen it being a catastrophe for productivity, or like really bad for internal execution. Where do you draw the line? Like radical transparency means you're completely open to it and giving, and sort of like, in at least my interpretation of it, like that you trust your team to, like, yeah, we can digest this and we understand because we've been involved, we're in the same boat. But when it boils down to it, you're not in the same boat as your employees, because they have a less than 1% cut share in the company's future, versus you might have as a founder a lot more and maybe everything at stake, right?
Yep.
So there's a difference there. Like they are sort of in the same place and we're in the same boat, but also not, right?
Yep.
What happens if you're radically transparent? Would you start looking for other jobs while you're sharing the challenges of companies? Like, yeah, you get my point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. And, I've navigated this quite a bit because there is a balance. There's a fine line. I think, I like to index on over communicating, but then I allow my team, my partners to sort of manage that throttle. Help me understand where information is no longer valuable. It's actually diminishing, right?
Yep.
To you, meaning it's creating more worry, it's creating more distraction. Help me understand what that balance looks like. Just like with situational leadership, right? How you manage one person might be different than how you manage another. How you communicate is equally the same. And so I try to understand, like as a manager or leader myself, I try to understand my team at an individual basis as much as I can to understand what's valuable to them and allow them to opt out of my over communication.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, how does this translate at the sort of broader company level when you think about things like runway, and if that runway is closing in and we're going to lose funding and it's going to be catastrophic? Knock on wood, I hadn't actually been in that scenario. However, I joined DoorDash at a time when they were just, getting over that line. It was in 2016, I think, 2015, 2016, when DoorDash was literally, I think they had about 3 months runway in front of them. They were the number 6 in the market in terms of food delivery in the US. And they were sort of at wit's end. And what I learned through a bunch of my colleagues who were, there at the time, was it was very much known and felt, and it actually lit a fire. And so the people that were there within the company, it was fuel, it was energy for them. It wasn't a distraction, it was motivation for them to do that much more. What transpired was they ended up getting more rounds of funding, one significant round, and that gave them a little bit more runway. And that actually catapulted them at a time when they moved from number 6 to number 1 in the market in the US in food delivery. And that transition transpired over the span of about 2 years, where they were about to run out of runway to where they became market leader.
Like a near-death experience.
Yeah. And then you win the race.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It's a great example, practical, concrete example, where clearly, like, if this has been really transparent, and was transparent internally, there was a lot of trust in the room, and a lot of seniority and good culture, so people could cope with it. Really, really interesting. Last thing I wanted to talk about, which I really enjoyed when we did the session, was you mentioned trust, diversity, and team performance. Like, how do they connect? And do you want to break that down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all understand the value and potential of diverse teams. We are all trying to be intentional about creating those and hiring for those. However, simply populating your team with diverse perspective and experiences doesn't always translate into better performance. In fact, the uncomfortable truth is diverse teams can actually underperform homogenous teams if they are not managed actively for differences among team members. And so this is actually, the reason for this is due in part to a term called the common information effect. And that basically, says that as human beings, we tend to focus on the things that we have in common with other people. We tend to seek out and affirm our shared knowledge because it confirms our value, our kinship with the group. And so, diverse teams by definition actually have less common information that are readily available to them and used to make collective decision making. And so the relationship between trust, diversity, and team performance is actually really, really interesting. And so for us as leaders, going back to that trust triangle and authenticity, it's up to us to create an environment where people can actually bring their authentic selves to work. And when they do that, they're bringing their most uniquely valuable parts as well. When they do that, and they can freely share their perspectives, they can freely share their experiences, then it allows us to actually tap into the value of their diversity and allow us to make high value decisions as a collective team. And so the idea is creating that inclusive team, not just a diverse team.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so what I'm getting out of that is it's not enough just to have a good diverse mix of people. You need to foster and provide the right fuel in order to get the best out of everyone. And instead of like unconsciously leaning on that everyone is on the same page all the time. So a little bit of work up front, but way more outcome and output in the other end.
Absolutely. It's very clear that it's not a diverse team that outperforms the homogenous team. It's the inclusive team that outperforms the homogenous and the diverse team.
Yeah.
And to your point, It's actually, there's a term that, a lot of people use, which is, I'm going to create a psychologically safe environment for my
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
I actually, while well-intentioned, I actually, tend to go against that because it feels a bit defensive. For me, I like to create a psychologically empowered environment where people feel compelled to bring themselves to work. They feel compelled to bring their differences to work. And when you do that, again, you're bringing that unique value from that individual to the table.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, so instead of you're communicating two different things. It's like you're so precious, so we need to protect everything versus you're unique and have amazing skills.
Yeah.
Let me empower you to
Yeah.
be that best version of yourself.
Yeah. And actually, to your point, we can create the environment, but that's still passive. And so how do you actually encourage and pull, your teammate or your direct report? How do you pull them closer to being their true selves? And so it's not only passive of creating the environment, it's also active and giving them that encouragement, asking them to share their perspective.
Yeah. And some people are super introverts, some people are very extroverts, and like balancing that in a group that are very diverse.
Yeah.
That's a skill set in itself.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. It's like there's a lot of finesse and a lot of intent that needs to happen.
Yeah, for sure. So let's I can continue to talk about those topics and with you forever. I hope to catch up with you soon anyways.
Yeah.
But do you want to just wrap up with a few words of advice when companies are going through the early stage of growth and going through that, like, okay, we know now this product or service actually works, there's huge demand, now we're ready to put on the back burner. Like, what are the wrap up words or recommendations that you want to give?
Yeah, thank you. There's a quote from Keith Raboy, who is our CEO, co-founder of Open Store, and he's also the general partner of Founders Fund. And so what he does for 50% of his time every day is one, he dedicates to Open Store, and the other, he works with founders, right, on helping them amplify and launch their sort of products and their vision. And as startups, he says, we can be tricked into thinking that we're building a technology company. So you tend to focus a lot of your energy on the product, but ultimately you're really building a team that is building a product that is in turn building the company. And so what I like to stress, it's all about the humans. It's all about the people. And so as you look to build your company, whether it's the second hire, the 10th hire, the 100th hire, you need to invest the energy of identifying the best talent that you can put in the seat next to you. The best talent isn't always the most experienced, isn't the talent that went to this school or worked at this company. It's finding that unique talent that has the potential to grow with you. You want to optimize on quality and not speed. And it's difficult to do that, but you have to force yourself to do it. I do think that the macroeconomic environment is allowing us it's giving us that grace to do that, meaning being very diligent about hiring. But when the floodgates open, don't lean into speed, continue to lean into quality.
Yeah, very, very thoughtful words of advice to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Where can people reach you? Like on Twitter or?
Yeah. You can feel free to reach me on Twitter. My handle is just @Dobbins, my last name. One of the luxuries of being an early employee there. Outside of that, you feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'm happy to engage with folks to talk all things people strategy, hiring, anything of the like. I'm extremely passionate about that space and love to connect and equally learn as much as possible. And so if there are folks that are out there that love to engage, we would be happy to do so.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man. Have a great day now. I'm going to wrap up here with some dinner.
Awesome.
Other side of the Atlantic. So take
Sounds
care.
good.
Thanks to those
Awesome.
who tuned in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sebastian. Thanks you all.
Thanks. Bye.